Hi, welcome to Mr. Change Agent podcast. My name is Ron Ovitt, Mr. Change Agent. I'm a pastoral counselor, a recovery coach, a counselor. I've had a lot of experience working with people. I have a year-long class called Emotional Resilience, Living with the Fruit of the Spirit. And so we take a lot of topics that have to do with personal development, and I bring in spirituality as well as psychology. And so I'm glad you're here. Today, we want to talk about growing into maturity. You know, maturity isn't something that just happens. It's something that we have to be purposeful about. And so we're going to take a little time talking about that, growing into maturity. The goal is to go from a dependent baby into an adult. And so we think of a lot of times as being dependent as a baby and independent as an adult, but that's not always the case. That's not necessarily true. In maturity, we're not totally independent. Our goal, rather, is to be an adult that lives in community with other adults in interdependence. And so why there's some things we have to be our own self still, we have to deal with other people, and therein lies some opportunities for immaturity, isn't there? Relational immaturity. And so our goal then is to know how to deal and live with others in relationships. And so we want to be socially mature and emotionally mature. And so that's what I want to kind of talk about today. No one can be mature for us. In that sense, we are independent, right? We can't go to someone else and say, hey, can you be mature for me today? We can't do that. We need to be mature for ourselves. So in that respect, we are independent. But it's maturity as we deal with other people. We go from a child to an adult that deals with the pressures of emotions very differently in different circumstances. And so we need to overcome maturity. We need to reparent ourselves many times and overcome some of those things that we brought with us from childhood. Each one of us have probably different areas that we're immature in. We might be good at dealing with sadness, but when it comes to anger, we're immature. We may be able to be resilient in some areas, but in some areas we can't. It hurts too deep or something. And so there's areas where we all need to work on in our maturity. Which begs the question, what are some of the needs that we have? I mean, when you think of being mature and we're in a child, what are some of the needs that we had as a child? And as I read these, why don't you think about your own self? Ask yourself, how would I rate myself now? Did I succeed here, or is there still something missing? Let's take the first one. As a child and as an adult, we need to have safety and security with those that we trust and love. Now, how were you on that? When you were a child, was it an environment where you felt safe and secure and you could trust those that you loved? Perhaps not. If not, the question is, can you now? And the question today isn't necessarily, are they trustable? Am I trusting? You see, as I mature now, I can decide that I can start trusting people, and I can do things that protect myself, and yet I can be relational. I don't have to not trust someone just because of past experiences. As a child, another one, we need to know that love is constant, unconditional, and always there no matter what. Now, I know a lot of us didn't have that kind of love. We had conditional love. If you behave, if you do this, then I'll treat you with respect and love. If you don't, you'll be disciplined and punished or whatever. And sometimes that gets translated. Parents had good intentions, but sometimes it gets translated as a child that I have to perform for love. And that's a hard one to grow out of. I know personally I've struggled with that one, and that's a hard one to grow out of. And so as we move into maturity, we can have those kind of relationships where we can trust others, where we can have that kind of fellowship where we are unconditionally loved by others. And the best way to do that is learn to unconditionally love those that we're around. It's a reciprocal thing many times. And so you'll find that you can have a healthy attachment with people as you yourself reach out to them. And then you have people that love you unconditionally. Another one is that we need to know that we're loved, special, valued, and unique. And a lot of times we didn't get that as a child. And so we search for that meaning, we search for that purpose. And as an adult, we need to know that we can have that kind of purpose and fulfillment. That's where I bring in the spirituality, right? I don't just teach psychology, I teach the spirituality that God loves us, that he loves you, and that his love is unconditional, and that he's created you for a purpose and made you unique. And so you can find that kind of freedom in the Bible. As you study and read, you can find how much God loves you. You can have good Christian fellowship where you accept each other, and you can start to exercise your uniqueness. That's what the spiritual gifts are. I have a book all called Wired for Ministry you can look at, and it will talk about your own uniqueness and how God has created you and how you can use that for a purpose and find your own meaning in life as you use some of your own uniquenesses. Here's another one. We need to know that we belong and are connected to others in a special way. You know, I say this a lot in church settings when I talk to people about church. I said, people want to belong before they believe. And that's often the case. And I encourage us as churches and organizations to be loving toward people, help them belong. And that sense of belonging is important. And it happens as we feel mature, as we mature in our own self, as we feel welcomed by other people because of our own sense of self-worth. We don't question necessarily, are they going to like me? How am I doing? We can accept ourselves. And as we accept ourselves, we can assume that others might accept us. See, it's that maturity, knowing that we belong, knowing that we fed in, that people are happy to be with me. That sets in us a positive attitude when we go and meet other people. Now, sure, so there'll be some people that won't like you. There'll be some people that, because of their own immaturity, that we be confrontive or combative. But the point is, you want to mature in your own self, feel good about your own self, so that you can feel like you belong. And you go into a group with people and you sense that belonging. You sense that kind of reciprocal love for each other. We also need to know that we're loved without having to perform. And that is such a good feeling, to know that we don't have to perform for someone else's love. Now, don't get me wrong, if you got a job, you got to perform, right? They give you a performance review every year where they rate you. Are you performing or not? And I understand that, right? You get paid to do a job and they want you to do it right. But that shouldn't have anything to do with whether you're valued as a person, whether you're loved or not. Love should be unconditional. And if you didn't have that, it's hard to grasp. It's hard to grasp that you are lovable. See, that's the point. Am I lovable in my intrinsic self as I am? Am I a lovable creation by God? Well, you are. And when you start to sense that, know that, then you're able to bounce back when someone rejects you, when someone treats you bad, when you don't feel like you performed good enough. You can bounce back because you're not defined by that. Your definition is that I'm a lovable person because I was created this way. You see that? That's maturity, and we need to really grasp that and come to that. And then another one, we need to know that it's never too late to have loving, caring, nurturing relationships. We kind of covered that. And that we need a bond with our Creator. We need a bond with God. We need that spirituality that carries us through, that helps us bounce back from painful emotions. You see, that's what it's about. A lot of what I teach on is emotional resilience, that ability to bounce back. We can't help sometimes what thoughts come in our head. We can't help what other people do sometimes, right? But we can bounce back from those painful emotions. We can stop, reevaluate, come back to know who we are and accept ourselves. And so, anyways, that's some of the things that can happen, some of those maturity needs that we have. Let's talk for a minute about immature emotions. Now, we're all emotional. We all have emotions. But sometimes we get stuck in these emotions and they become immature. Let's talk about a few of them. First off, we're going to mature. We need to overcome some of these. One is fear of failure. It's easy to get blocked by that fear of failure. How are you on that? Where do you rate yourself? Is that something you need to work on? What about feeling inferior to other adults? How is it when you walk into a crowd? Do you have that sense of shame where you're kind of bowing down and looking down? How are you when you're with other adults? How about the need to please others? Are you so worried that you'll be rejected that you need to please others all the time? That's a sign of immaturity, something that you could work on. How about a fear of abandonment and rejection? Boy, that can cause us to just really act out, can it? And I read these things and I know what a lot of these are because I've had to work in them in my own life. My own story is that, I was a phobic child. I had anxiety when I was a child, way up into my 30s, and I went to school to study about psychology. I was functional, but I've had to work on a lot of these in my own life. And at every stage of development, I have to work on it again because life always throws new challenges, doesn't it? We always meet new people. We always get into another place where we may feel insecure, and we have to continually work on these things. But the good news is if we continually work on them, it gets better and better. And what used to take a week maybe to get through something takes a day or so, or a minute, or just a self-correction. And so you want to work on this. Here's another one. Do you suffer from false guilt? This inordinate guilt, and you're just beating yourself up all the time. That's another one that can cripple us. Are you realistic in the guilt that you feel, and have you sought forgiveness, and have you accepted that forgiveness? I know a lot of times if I did something wrong, it would just punish me. And I would get all bent out of shape and worried about it, and it would take forever to overcome that. And I had to really work on that. And so you want to work on the fact that, hey, is it true guilt? If so, then make amends, get forgiveness, and accept that forgiveness. If it's an inordinate guilt, false guilt, then you really need to ask, where's that coming from? What's going on here? And you need to be able to get rid of that. And of course, anxiety, right? Hyper-anxiety, this hypersensitivity that's going on all the time here in your gut where you're always on guard. I used to walk around like there was a predator in the room, like always on guard. And over time, and with some of the things that we'll teach you in these podcasts and in our videos and in our class that we teach, you'll learn how to really shut that off, how to really stop that hypervigilance. Anxiety is a crippler, and we have a lot of teachings on anxiety and worry. I have a new book coming out soon on meditations for anxiety that you can look in Amazon for. And so anxiety is a big one. Feelings of being broken or shameful. Have you ever met a woman that is really beautiful and yet she feels she's ugly? Have you ever tried to tell them that they're beautiful or nice looking and watch them just reject you totally about that? What happened there? Where did that sense of ugliness come from? And we all have, those kind of areas sometimes. If we're crippled with shame, we have those kind of areas where we feel just broken. We feel like we're so out of it. We're so minute in that area, deficient. You know what I'm saying? That's an immaturity, and we need to work on that. A lot of times, fear of expressing myself. Another one would be being over-competitive. I always have to compete, be on top. So there's a lot of these negative emotions, and they result in immature behavior and attitudes. And so, here's some of those. We find ourselves judgmental. Where would you rate yourself on a scale 1 to 5? No judgment or heavily judgmental? How about defensive? Do you find yourself being defensive? Or how about this passive-aggressive? You're really nice, you get the zinger in there. You go from passive to aggressive instead of being healthily assertive. What about standoffish and withdrawn? Do you find yourself being withdrawn and holding back and standoffish in a crowd with people? Or are you so self-absorbed? There's another stance that we can take that's immature. Everything's, it's all about me. I'm self-absorbed. I have to keep working on it. Or this black and white, right or wrong thinking. Everything's either a catastrophe or nothing's wrong, it's one color or another. There's no gray area. It's nothing. We think in extremes. Another one would be that we're dependent or clingy. We're dependent on others. We can't be self-sufficient. We don't know how to stand on our own 2 feet. We're afraid. We have fear in that area. And so those are some of the things that cause us to be immature. In the next podcast, I want to talk about how maturity is a process. And so you can get the transcript on this and look it over again and ask yourself, where are you? Where are you on some of these immature areas? And in our next podcast, look for it. It will be called Maturity is a Process.